I, Vorath 9, have seen many things in my 412 years of practicing xenobiology across 6 star systems. I have examined the brittle glass-like bones of the Korath. I have catalogued the 17 functioning hearts of a Brechian elder. I have even, on one particularly memorable occasion, watched a Zolnari warrior sneeze and accidentally dislocate 3 of its own limbs simultaneously. That was a good day. That was a day that reminded me why I chose this profession. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, in my 4 centuries of medical practice could have prepared me for the human. It started on a Tuesday. Or, what the humans aboard the interspecies medical station Kelvara call a Tuesday. We, the Veth, do not have Tuesdays. We have a perfectly rational 43-hour cycle that does not require naming, because giving a day a name implies the day has a personality, and days do not have personalities. Humans, however, disagree with this on a spiritual level. The human walked into my examination suite at precisely 1400 hours, which I had been told was either afternoon or after lunch, depending on which human you asked. His name was Dario Fen. He was, by human standards, what they call average. Average height, average weight, average number of limbs, which is to say 4, 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 fingers, 10 toes, 1 head, which I still find philosophically suspicious because why would any species evolve with only 1 processing unit? What happens if it breaks? These are the questions that haunt me. Dario Fen sat down on my examination platform, looked around at my sterile white lab with the mild curiosity of someone browsing a market stall, and said, "So you're the alien doctor, huh?" I told him that yes, I was the alien doctor. I told him that from my perspective he was also an alien. He laughed at this. Humans laugh at things that are not jokes, which is either charming or alarming depending on the day. His file had been sent ahead of his arrival. I had read it, and then I had read it again, because I assumed there had been a translation error somewhere. There was not. The document was accurate. Dario Fen, aged 31 standard human years, had arrived at Kelvara Station for what his primary physician back on Earth had described as a routine wellness check. A wellness check. As if you could check wellness like checking whether a pot of food has boiled. As if health were a binary condition that could be confirmed with a glance. I began the examination with basic vital readings. His body temperature registered at 36.8 degrees Celsius. This is considered normal for humans. For context, this is the temperature at which the Brechians begin to experience what they call the warming sickness. It is a condition that requires immediate medical intervention among their kind. Dario Fen was sitting on my table, completely comfortable, radiating this heat as though it were nothing at all, as though his entire body were not at all times a slow and steady furnace. I noted this in my records. I kept my expression professionally neutral. Then I ran the bone density scan. Now I want to be fair here. I want to be a thorough and unbiased scientist. But when the scan results came back and I saw the density readings for human bone tissue, I genuinely paused. I genuinely set down my scanning device and looked at Dario Fen and said nothing for a full 11 seconds. "You good?" Dario asked. I was not entirely sure. See, among most spacefaring species, bones are either very strong or very light. The Korath have bones that are nearly transparent and flexible, perfect for their low-gravity worlds. The Velk have a skeletal structure made of a biological compound so tough that when one of them dies, the bones can be used for construction materials. We, the Veth, have an exoskeletal framework that distributes pressure externally. It is elegant. It is efficient. Humans have bones that are, by comparison, embarrassingly middle of the road. They are not the strongest bones I have ever recorded. They are not the lightest. They are calcium-based, which struck me as a peculiar choice on the part of evolution. Calcium, the same element that builds their teeth. Their skeletons and their teeth are made of essentially the same material. I found this either poetic or horrifying. I have not decided which, but here is what bothered me. What bothered me deeply professionally as a scientist. The bones break. They break with inconvenient frequency. Humans break their bones doing activities that most species would consider only mildly strenuous. They break bones falling off bicycles, which are 2-wheeled personal transportation devices that have no stabilization system and require constant active balance to operate. They break bones playing games that involve catching or throwing objects at speed. They break bones sleeping, occasionally, if they sleep in a position their skeleton does not enjoy. And yet, the bones heal. That was the part that made me set down my scanning device. That was the part that made me look at Dario Fen with the beginning of something I was not ready to name yet. The bones heal, not with medical assistance, not with calcium supplements, or nano repair technology, or anything that resembles external intervention. on their own. Over time, calcium deposits migrate to the fracture site, guided by biological signals, and the bone fuses back together, sometimes stronger than before. The human body reads its own damage and files a repair request, and the repair request is fulfilled by the body itself, using materials the body stores for exactly this purpose. I asked Dario if he had ever broken a bone. He shrugged, which is a human gesture meaning either yes, no, maybe, or I am thinking about it. Collarbone when I was 12, he said, fell out of a tree. Doc said it was a pretty bad break. He paused, healed in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I wrote this down. Any complications? I asked. Nope, he said, good as new. I stared at him for a moment that was probably too long to be considered professionally appropriate. Moving on, the cardiovascular assessment came next. I placed the biosensor array against his chest and listened to his heart, and this was the moment I started to understand that my entire career had been, up to this point, a prologue. The human heart is, structurally, a disaster. It is a 4-chambered pump made of muscle tissue. It has no redundancy. One heart, one pump. If it stops, the human stops. There is no backup system, no auxiliary circulation, no parallel processing. If the single heart fails, the organism fails. This is the kind of biological architecture that would make any engineering student fail a design course. And yet the heart of Dario Fenn beat 68 times per minute, steady and rhythmic, and had been doing so without stopping for 31 years. 31 years. That is approximately 16,300,000,000 beats, give or take, without maintenance, without replacement parts, running on a diet that Dario himself described as pretty good mostly, except on weekends. I asked him what happened on weekends. He told me about something called pizza. I decided to stay focused. The heart muscle repairs itself. That was the next thing I learned. Cardiac muscle cells, called cardiomyocytes, have limited but genuine regenerative capacity. The human heart, which is working every second of every day of every year, which is under constant pressure and stress, which is pumping blood through approximately 96,000 kilometers of blood vessels, this heart finds time, in between all of that labor, to quietly maintain itself. I sat with this information for a moment. The human body, it was becoming clear to me, is not elegant. It is not refined. It is not the product of careful, considered design. It is, to be blunt, a mess. It is a collection of compromises and workarounds and solutions that look like they were arrived at through trial and error over millions of years because they were. It is patched, and jury-rigged, and full of systems that overlap and contradict and occasionally malfunction. But it does not stop. That was the thing. That was the thing I was beginning to see, sitting there in my clean white examination room with Dario Fenn on my table, looking mildly bored and asking if the scan was going to take much longer because he had a lunch reservation. The human body does not stop. I asked him to remove his outer garment so I could examine his skin. He did so without complaint. And I looked at his skin, which is the largest organ of the human body, covering approximately 2 square meters of surface area, acting simultaneously as a thermal regulator, a sensory interface, a water barrier, a first defense against pathogens, and a display surface for a remarkable variety of pigment variations across the species. I found 3 scars. I asked about them. One was from a childhood accident involving a bicycle, again with the bicycles. One was from a surgery performed to remove an inflamed internal organ called the appendix, which is a small pouch attached to the large intestine that serves no confirmed purpose, and occasionally decides to become infected and rupture, which is a medical emergency. The human body has an organ inside it that does nothing, and sometimes tries to kill its host. Dario mentioned this casually, as though it were a minor inconvenience, as though having a vestigial biological time bomb inside your abdomen were simply a normal part of existing. The 3rd scar was from a dog bite. I asked what a dog was. He showed me a photograph on his personal device. It was a creature about half his height, furry, with large dark eyes and a broad wet nose. It looked at the camera with an expression of pure weaponized affection. "They're our best friends," Dario said. "We've lived with them for about 15,000 years. I looked at the photograph. I looked at the scar on his forearm. "Your best friend bit you," I said. "Different dog," he said. "Still a great dog, just scared." I wrote this down too. It was around this point that I ran the immune system panel. This was the test that I had expected to be the most straightforward part of the examination. The immune system is a subject I understand well. Most species have immune systems of varying complexity. I expected to record the results, note the baseline, and move along. The results came back, and I did not move along. I sat there for a very long time. The human immune system is, and I want to be precise here, insane. It is not insane in a bad way. It is insane in the way that a city that has survived 10,000 years of war, plague, flood, and fire is insane. It is insane in the way that something can only be insane if it has been tested, broken, rebuilt, and tested again, over and over for so long that it has become something beyond what it was originally designed to be. The human body runs two immune systems simultaneously. 2. The innate system, which is fast, broad, and aggressive, and the adaptive system, which is slow, precise, and permanent. The adaptive system learns. When it encounters a pathogen, it studies it. It builds a custom weapon against it. And then it remembers. For years, for decades, for life in many cases. The human body meets a threat once, defeats it, and then keeps a record of how it did so, just in case the threat returns. This is not a biological immune system. This is a biological military intelligence program, and it was working, quietly, inside Dario Fen, who was now checking his personal device and asking if we were almost done. One more test, I told him. He nodded and put the device away with the patience of someone who has sat in waiting rooms before and survived. I queued up the final scan, the neural assessment, the one I had saved for last because, honestly, by this point I needed a moment to prepare myself emotionally. The human brain is 3 pounds of electrochemical tissue inside a calcium shell. It has no moving parts. It consumes approximately 20% of the body's total energy, despite representing only 2% of body weight. It processes sensory information, manages motor function, regulates unconscious biological processes, generates language, stores memory, produces emotion, and does all of this simultaneously, in parallel, without the user being consciously aware of most of it. And it does this for 80 years, sometimes 90, sometimes more. Dario Fen's brain scan came back, and the results were routine, perfectly routine. No anomalies, no flags. A healthy, unremarkable human brain, doing approximately 43 impossible things per second without breaking a sweat. I put the scanner down. I looked at Dario Fen. He looked at me. So, he said, "Am I healthy?" I opened my mouth. I closed my mouth. I looked at my notes, which filled 3 data tablets in which I already knew I would be writing a research paper about. I looked back at him. "Yes," I said. "Remarkably." He smiled, which involves the contraction of approximately 43 facial muscles. "Great," he said. "Can I get a copy of the results for my insurance?" I told him I would send the full report. What I did not tell him was that I intended to also send the report to every xenobiologist I knew. What I did not tell him was that I had in the past 3 hours completely revised my understanding of what a biological organism could be. What I did not tell him was that I was going to need to do more tests. Because the immune panel results, the ones I had just seen, were either a laboratory error, or they were something else entirely. Something that I was not sure I had the right words for yet. Something that was going to keep me awake through several consecutive VETH sleep cycles. Something that, when I finally understood it, was going to change everything I thought I knew about human beings. He thanked me, collected his jacket, and walked out of my examination room. And I sat there, alone, staring at the results on my data tablet. And for the first time in 412 years of medicine, I was not sure who was the alien in that room. I did not sleep that night. This is unusual for a VETH. We are disciplined sleepers. We enter our rest cycle at precisely calculated intervals. We complete exactly the required duration, and we wake refreshed and ready to process the next sequence of information. Sleep, for us, is a scheduled event. It has never once been interrupted by something as irrational as curiosity. But there I was, Vorath 9, 412 years old, decorated xenobiologist, recipient of the Kelvara Station Medal of Scientific Excellence, 3 times, lying in my rest pod with my eyes wide open and Dario Fen's immune panel, results projected on my ceiling. The numbers did not make sense. Let me explain what I mean by that, because did not make sense is doing a lot of work in that sentence. In science, when something does not make sense, it usually means one of 2 things. Either the instrument was wrong, or your understanding was wrong. The instrument, I had already triple-checked. It was not wrong, which left option 2, sitting there, smug and unavoidable. My understanding was wrong. The specific thing that was wrong about my understanding was this. According to every model of immune system function I had ever studied, the adaptive immune response in humans should have a ceiling, a maximum complexity threshold beyond which the system could not generate new targeted responses without degrading existing ones. Memory cells compete for resources. Storage, metabolically speaking, is not free. There is a limit to how many enemies a body can remember. Dario Fen's panel showed zero degradation of existing immune memory alongside the generation of novel response pathways. Zero, not minimal degradation, not acceptable degradation within normal parameters. Zero. I sent the results to my colleague Dr. Frakes of the Velk Institute of Biological Sciences. Frakes is the most skeptical scientist I know. She once spent 14 months disproving a research paper that turned out to be correct just because the methodology annoyed her. She is thorough. She is exacting. She is exactly who you want looking at something that does not make sense. Her response came back in 6 hours. It said, "Run it again." I ran it again. Same results. Her second response came back in 4 hours. It said, "Come to my lab, bring the human." I went to Dario Fen's quarters on the residential level of Kelvara Station. I knocked. He answered the door in what humans call pajamas, which are garments worn exclusively for sleeping despite being by any objective measure comfortable enough to wear at all times. He had a cup of something hot in his hand. Coffee. I had learned about coffee by this point. Coffee is a beverage made from roasted seeds dissolved in hot water, which sounds like the description of a mistake, but which humans consume with religious devotion. I told him I needed to run additional tests. He blinked, took a sip of his coffee, blinked again. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No," I said, which was accurate. "Something is unusual," I added, which was more accurate. He looked at me for a moment over the rim of his cup, with the particular expression humans make when they are deciding whether to be concerned. Then he said, "Give me 10 minutes," and closed the door. He came back and ate. Humans underestimate themselves frequently. I noted this. Frakes' laboratory was on the upper science deck, a sprawling space that smelled of Velk chemical compounds and organized chaos. Frakes herself was already at her primary station when we arrived, surrounded by holographic data projections and empty nutrient containers. She had apparently also not slept. When she saw Dario, she circled him once, slowly, the way a scientist circles something they are not sure they believe yet. "This is the human?" she asked me. "This is Dario Fen," I said. Dario gave a small wave. "Hi." Frakes leaned in close to examine his face. Too close, by human social standards. Dario leaned back slightly but did not otherwise react. He was, I was coming to understand, unusually comfortable with discomfort. "He looks fragile," Frakes said, still staring. "I'm right here," Dario said pleasantly. Frakes ignored this. "The skin is thin, the skull is unarmored, the eyes are external and unprotected." She straightened up and looked at me. "Vorath, this organism appears to have been designed specifically to be vulnerable to physical damage." "I know," I said. "And yet the immune data shows." "I know," I said again. She looked back at Dario. "We are going to need to take more samples." "Cool," Dario said. "Do you have coffee?" Frakes did not have coffee. She had something she called a functional nutrient substitute, which is the scientific equivalent of telling someone who asked for a beach vacation that a puddle exists. Dario accepted a cup of it with the grace of someone who understands that this is the price of cooperation, took one sip, made a face he was too polite to fully show, and sat down on the examination bench without being asked. The tests began. Over the next 4 hours, Frakes and I processed 18 separate biological samples from Dario Fen. Blood panels, tissue cultures, a saliva sample, which Dario provided while finishing the nutrient substitute with the determination of a man seeing something through to the end. A skin cell scraping, cerebrospinal fluid, which required a procedure Dario handled with remarkable composure for a being whose central nervous system was being accessed with a needle. "Does that hurt?" Frakes asked while taking the cerebrospinal sample. "Little bit," Dario said. "How much is a little bit?" Dario thought about it. "Like a 4 out of 10. Frakes looked at me. I looked at Frakes. For the record, a cerebrospinal tap on a veth is a procedure that requires 3 days of sedation and a recovery period of 2 weeks. I chose not to mention this to Dario. The results came back one by one, and with each result the room got slightly quieter. Not because nothing was happening, because too much was happening, and Frakes and I were both scientists who had enough experience to recognize when the ground beneath a theory starts moving. Let me walk you through what we found. The human blood sample contained, among other things, platelets. Platelets are cell fragments whose entire purpose is emergency damage control. When a human bleeds, these platelets rush to the wound, cluster together and form a physical plug within seconds. Then, over the following minutes and hours, they coordinate a more permanent clotting structure. They are, in the most literal sense, A rapid response emergency repair team living in the bloodstream at all times, ready and waiting for something to go wrong. This was not surprising. I already knew humans had platelets. What was surprising was the platelet response time we recorded during the sample collection. When the needle broke Dario's skin to collect blood, the wound began closing in 11 seconds. 11 seconds. Frakes made a sound I had never heard her make before. A sound somewhere between scientific notation and honest astonishment. Then we looked at the tissue cultures. Human cells, outside the body, in a controlled laboratory environment, continued to behave as though they were inside the body. They communicated with each other through chemical signals. They organized themselves. The skin cells specifically did something that made Frakes set down her data recorder and stand very still for a moment. They began, in the culture dish, to form a layered structure, without a body directing them, without a biological framework telling them where to go. They just instinctively started rebuilding something that looked like skin. It's doing it on its own, Frakes said. Yes, I said, without instructions. The instructions are already inside them, I said. We both looked at Dario, who was scrolling through something on his personal device. You know we can see you using that, Frakes said. I know, he said. I'm reading about Veth biology. Exoskeleton, right? That's wild, he said. That's wild, with genuine admiration. A man whose cells were in a dish 3 meters away, independently constructing tissue, was marveling at someone else's biology. I sat down, because the immune panel replication had just finished processing, and it matched the original results exactly. 0 degradation. Expanding memory bank. Novel response pathways being built alongside fully preserved existing ones. Vorath, Frakes said quietly. Look at the pathogen exposure history. I looked. Dario Fenn's immune memory contained records of pathogen encounters stretching back to his infancy, childhood diseases, environmental bacteria, viral exposures, vaccine-introduced attenuated pathogens which are weakened versions of dangerous diseases introduced intentionally to teach the immune system without causing actual illness. A strategy so philosophically aggressive that the first time I read about it I had to sit with it for a full day. Humans looked at deadly diseases and said, essentially, let me introduce you to a smaller version of this threat so my body can learn to destroy it. And the immune system said, understood, filing this for future reference. And every single one of those encounters, from decades ago, was still there, perfectly stored, instantly accessible. He has never forgotten a single threat his body has encountered, Frakes said. No, I said. She pulled up a comparison from her own medical records. A Velk immune panel showing natural degradation of early childhood pathogen memory due to resource competition. Clean, expected, perfectly normal by Velk biological standards. Then she put Dario's panel next to it. The contrast was not subtle. Vorath, she said, and her voice had a quality I had not heard from her before. Something careful, something approaching reverence, which from Frakes is the scientific equivalent of another person falling to their knees. This is not a limitation overcome. This is not an adaptation. This is a different category of thing, I said. Yes, she said, entirely. We were quiet for a moment. Dario looked up from his device. He must have noticed the silence. Because humans are, it turns out, surprisingly sensitive to the emotional tone of a room. Despite having only one brain, no secondary sensory organs, and no exoskeletal vibration receptors, he picked up on the shift in atmosphere immediately. Okay, he said slowly. You're both doing the thing where you get real quiet, and honestly that's more worrying than if you were talking. Frakes looked at him. Are you aware, she said, of what your immune system is doing? He blinked. Being healthy? It is, she said. Building active novel pathways, while simultaneously maintaining perfect archival records of every previous threat response, with zero resource competition between the two processes, in a 3-pound organ that also manages your motor control, your language, your memory, your consciousness, and your emotional state. Dario sat with this. Huh, he said. Huh, Frakes repeated as though testing whether that was the right response. I mean, Dario said, I did get a cold last February. Frakes turned to me. What is February? A month, I said. They name those too. She pinched the space between her upper sensory nodes, which is the Velk equivalent of rubbing one's temples. He got a respiratory infection, and he is telling us this as though it is evidence of limitation. It is limitation, Dario said. The cold made me feel awful. For how long? I asked. 4 days, he said. 4 days. An immune system of impossible sophistication, encountering a pathogen, staging a complete biological war against it, and resolving the conflict in 4 days, with the patient experiencing the symptoms as the side effect of the immune response, not the disease itself. The human body when it is sick is not failing, it is fighting. The fever, the fatigue, the inflammation, those are weapons. The human body runs hot on purpose to create an environment hostile to the invader. It makes itself temporarily miserable in order to win, and then it wins. And then it remembers. I stood up and walked to the window of Praxe's lab. Outside, I could see the observation deck where several humans from the station's residential wing were gathering, apparently to watch a meteor shower passing the station's orbit. They stood in a cluster, pointing, talking, some of them holding the same hot beverages they always seemed to be holding. One of them laughed at something another said. The sound was muffled through the glass but recognizable, clear and uncomplicated. Vorath, Praxe said behind me. I want to run the longevity projection against the cellular data. I turned back. I ran that last night. She looked at me. And, the cells have error correction mechanisms I have not seen at this scale in any species in my entire career, I said. The DNA repair processes alone account for 3 independent redundant systems. When one fails, another compensates. When 2 fail, the third holds. The telomere degradation rates in his samples are slower than his chronological age would predict. By how much? She asked. Enough, I said, to suggest that the biological ceiling for human longevity is not where medicine currently places it. She was quiet for a long moment. Not where they think, she said. Not remotely, I said. Dario cleared his throat. I feel like you're talking about me like I'm not here. We are talking about you like you are the most interesting thing in this room, Praxe said. You should take it as a compliment. He seemed to decide this was fair. I sat back down and looked at him. Truly looked, at the thin skin and the unarmored skull and the one heart and the one brain and the 2 eyes sitting right there on the surface of his face, completely exposed, blinking away in the fluorescent light of the lab. A species that looks like it was designed to lose, I thought. A species that looks like an early draft, like the universe sketched something out quickly and moved on to other things, and the sketch got up and started walking around and refused to stop. I thought about the broken bone that healed in 6 weeks. I thought about the platelets clustering in 11 seconds. I thought about the cells in the dish building something without being told to. I thought about the immune system filing away every enemy it had ever met, in perfect order, forever, just in case. I thought about 15,000 years of living alongside animals that occasionally bit them. I thought about a 31-year-old man, average in every measurable way, sitting on a laboratory bench drinking a nutrient substitute he clearly found disgusting, cooperating with alien scientists with the easy patience of someone who is simply accustomed to confusing situations and has decided long ago to be fine with them. Dario, I said. Yeah, has anyone ever told you, I said slowly, that your biology is remarkable? He considered this with the expression of a man who has never been asked anything like this before. Not in those exact words, he said. Usually when I go to the doctor it's more like eat more vegetables. You should eat more vegetables, I said, because I had in fact noted some nutritional gaps in his blood work, and I am still a doctor regardless of what else is happening. But also your body is one of the most sophisticated biological systems I have encountered in 400 years of practice. He was quiet, a different kind of quiet than before. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically. Humans are subtle about this, but I noticed it. Huh, he said again, but differently this time. Praxe pulled up the final data summary on the main display. 18 samples, 47 separate measurements, 3 independent analyses, all consistent. She stood in front of it with her arms behind her back, and the expression she reserves for things she has decided are real. I am going to need to submit a paper, she said. So am I said. They will not believe it without replication, she said. No, I agreed. She looked at Dario. Are you staying on Kelvara long? 3 more weeks, he said. Good, she said. She turned back to the display. We have a lot more tests. He accepted this with the equanimity of a man who has, over the past several hours, donated multiple biological samples, been discussed at length as though he were a fascinating piece of furniture, finished an entire cup of something that tasted like processed ambition, and discovered that 2 alien scientists consider him to be one of the most biologically unusual organisms they have ever encountered. He accepted it because I was coming to understand. This is what humans do. They accept, they adapt, they stay in rooms that are uncomfortable, and drink beverages that are not quite right, and cooperate with alien doctors who circle them too closely and ask too many questions. They persist. That is the word I had been searching for, through the entire examination, through the sleepless night, through the hours in Praxe's lab with the data climbing higher and the silence getting heavier. Persist. Not elegantly, not efficiently, not according to any design principle I could identify, or any blueprint that would satisfy an engineering review, but absolutely, completely, with the full, unreasonable, total commitment of something that has decided, at every cellular level, that stopping is simply not an option. I looked at Dario Fenn one more time. He had already gone back to his device. He was, I could see, looking at a picture, a small furry creature with enormous eyes and an expression of complete trust. A dog. His best friend species, the ones who had lived alongside them for 15,000 years, the ones who occasionally bit them out of fear. He was smiling at it. I picked up my data tablet and began writing my report. The first line said, "Initial assumptions regarding human biological limitations must be entirely revised." I paused. Then I deleted it and started again. The first line said, "I was wrong. For a scientist of 412 years, that sentence is not easy to write." But sitting in that lab with 18 samples worth of impossible data glowing on the display behind me, and a human on the bench scrolling through pictures of dogs and asking if anyone wanted to find a place for dinner later, it was the most honest sentence I had ever written, and I had a feeling it would not be the last time I wrote it.